The evening air was sharp with the bite of winter as Ethan trudged home through the snow-covered trail. The remote mountains had been his home for as long as he could remember. He was used to the silence, to the serenity that came with the cold winds and the isolation of his little cabin. It was the kind of life that made him feel close to the earth, close to the wild. As the sun dipped behind the tall pines, casting long shadows over the landscape, Ethan's footsteps slowed when he heard something unusual. A faint whimper, almost a soft, pleading cry. It was barely audible over the wind, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. He had lived here long enough to know the sounds of the forest, but this was different. His instincts kicked in. Following the sound, Ethan walked deeper into the woods, the snow crunching underfoot. There, nestled among the thick trees, he found the source of the cry. A tiny bear cub, no more than a few months old, was lying in the snow. Its fur was matted with ice and frost, and its small body trembled with the cold. The bear cub was weak, its breath shallow, and its eyes wide with fear and hunger. The sight sent a chill through Ethan's spine. Ethan's heart sank as he looked around, hoping to see the mother bear nearby. But there was no sign of her. The cub's cries had been faint, barely noticeable to anyone except Ethan, who knew the wilderness and its sounds better than anyone. He knew the forest could be a dangerous place for a baby bear without its mother, especially in the freezing cold of winter. Ethan's mind raced. He had always believed in the natural order of things. The wilderness was harsh, and only the strongest survived. But something about this cub, alone and starving in the snow, made Ethan feel a sense of responsibility. He couldn't leave it out here to die. He had to help. Slowly, Ethan crouched down, careful not to startle the cub. He had heard the stories of bears turning aggressive when they felt threatened, especially when their young were involved. But this bear cub didn't seem to have the energy to lash out. It looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes as if it had no choice but to rely on him. Ethan reached out cautiously, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "It's all right, little one," he murmured, gently reaching for the cub. The animal's body was cold and stiff, but it didn't resist. It let him scoop it up, its small, fragile body trembling in his arms. He could feel its bones beneath its thin, matted fur. The cub was starving, too weak to put up any fight. Ethan knew he had to act fast. The wilderness could be unforgiving, and the cub's chances of surviving the night were slim if left out in the cold. He carefully cradled the cub against his chest and began to make his way back to his cabin, each step heavy with urgency. The forest around him seemed eerily quiet, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for him to make it back. By the time Ethan reached the warmth of his cabin, the cub's body had gone limp in his arms. He hurried inside, placing the cub near the fire. He built up the flames and used the warmth to thaw out the cub's frozen body, wrapping it in old blankets. He worked quickly, knowing that if the cub wasn't warmed up soon, it could suffer from hypothermia. As the minutes passed, the cub's breathing steadied, and it began to stir. Ethan didn't have much to offer in terms of food, but he made do with what little he had, some leftover stew and a bit of milk. He fed the cub gently, coaxing it to drink. The cub drank hungrily, its small paws shaking with each sip. Ethan could feel his heart swelling with emotion. This little bear was dependent on him now, and there was no turning back. That night, the cub slept peacefully by the fire. Ethan stayed awake, watching over it. His thoughts were filled with the reality that he had brought an animal from the wild into his home, into his life. But what would happen when it was strong enough to leave? Would it return to the wild? And if it did, what would become of it? Would it survive, or would it meet a tragic end, like so many others in the unforgiving wilderness? As the days passed, the bear cub grew stronger. Ethan's cabin, once filled only with silence, now echoed with the sounds of the cub's playful growls and soft cries. The cub, which Ethan had named Buddy, had become a part of his life in a way he hadn't expected. Each morning, Buddy would follow Ethan around the cabin, clumsily trying to mimic his movements, and each night the cub would curl up next to the fire, content and safe. The bond between man and bear was growing stronger. Clara knew that someday Buddy would have to return to the wild, but what worried him most was whether the cub would ever be able to survive without him. The wilderness was a tough place, And without its mother, Buddy would have a hard time adjusting. Ethan was torn. He had done everything he could to keep Buddy alive, but the day would come when he would have to say goodbye. Then one evening, after weeks of careful observation, Buddy started acting strange. He had always been curious, but now he seemed restless, constantly pacing the cabin. Ethan watched him closely, unsure of what was going on. Buddy would stare out of the cabin window, his eyes filled with a deep longing, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. The next morning, as Ethan was preparing breakfast, Buddy suddenly bolted for the door. Ethan tried to call him back, but the cub was determined. He pushed past Ethan, running into the woods with a speed and purpose that Ethan had never seen before. The man stood still for a moment, shocked by the sudden urgency in Buddy's movements. Ethan followed, calling out to the cub, but Buddy was already too far ahead. He moved through the forest like a creature reborn, no longer the frail, starving cub that had once needed his help. Ethan's heart pounded as he followed, the cold air biting at his skin, but he knew what was happening. Buddy was returning to the wild. As Ethan approached the edge of the clearing, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Buddy was standing next to a larger figure, a mother bear. The two bears stood in silence for a moment, and then, as if on cue, Buddy stepped forward and nuzzled his mother, his movements slow and cautious. Ethan could see the bond between them, the trust and love that had been lost but was now found again. The mother bear looked at Ethan, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite place. Recognition, perhaps? Then in a move that left Ethan breathless, the mother bear took a few steps forward, her large head bowing as if in thanks. Buddy had returned home, and he had repaid his debt in the only way he could, by reuniting with his family. And in that moment, Ethan understood that kindness wasn't always repaid in the way he expected. Sometimes it came full circle in the most unexpected of ways. The wilderness, while harsh, had its own form of gratitude, and Ethan had just witnessed it in its rawest form. As the mother bear and Buddy disappeared into the forest, Ethan stood still, watching them go. He had helped save a life, but in return the wild had shown him something far more valuable, a silent thank you that transcended words. Ethan knew that Buddy was meant for the wild, and though his heart ached with the loss, he understood that it was the way of nature. Sometimes the wild would repay you for your kindness, but it would always take its own course.